This is our second week looking at worship. Last week we looked at Jesus, looking at who he is and why we should worship him. Today we're going to look at what worship is and what it means to us today and how we might participate in it. Our Bible reading that we're going to look at mainly is Psalm 95. I'm going to read from verses 1 to 7. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all kings. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands form the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. The Psalms are a really popular book amongst Jews and Christians because they contain all sorts of gems of wisdom and insight. Many people would group the Psalms into 5 separate books: 1 to 41, 42 to 72, 73 to 89, 90 to 106, and 107 to 150. And some of the Psalms are ascribed to people like David, or they are connected with a specific event, or even have some musical notation to them. But our Psalm that we're looking at isn't like that at all. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know what the occasion was that someone wrote it, but it was obviously written by someone who really wanted to just express their thanks and their praise to God for something that had happened. And this person really wanted to encourage others to become involved in worship. Surely that's one of the things as a Christian church that we ought to be about, encouraging people to be involved in worshiping God. The Bible is, some people would say, the book of invitation. So they look to Isaiah 55, where we're told to come and buy without money and without cost. Or they look in the New Testament of the words of Jesus in Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. That idea of coming to God is a key theme in this psalm that we're looking at tonight. Indeed, the word come appears 3 times, and each time, although our Bibles translate it come, it's actually a different Hebrew word that means something slightly different. So the first time it's used is in verse 1, which says, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. This is a complicated idea to get your head round, and so the word that's translated come could actually be translated walk. So the idea is that we're coming to God, but we're walking. There is actually some movement going on. And that movement is then taken up with the idea of singing. So there is some action involved with it as well. People love to sing, they love to celebrate, and the people of God are no different. Throughout the Old Testament, they were singing at all sorts of events when good things happened, and they were singing in the New Testament as well, I believe. So the idea is to come, or is to walk and sing praises to God at the same time. Second time the word appears in verse 2. Again, it is not the same word as in verse 1, and this time it says, let us come before him with thanksgiving. Here, the idea is walking at the head of a procession. So there's a bit of a connection with the first time in that it could be translated walk, but it takes something else. The idea is of procession, and we are walking at the head of a procession. It marks a progression in that the person who received the invitation in verse 1 is now encouraged to take the lead in verse 2, to come before God with thanksgiving, because the psalmist is saying we have so many things to thank God for. We should be at the front of the queue thanking him. The third time the word come is used is in verse 6, which says, come, let us bow down in worship. And here, the Hebrew word for come involves opposites, because it might mean to come and it might mean to go, depending on the context. So the use of these three different words for come doesn't leave us, I don't think, with any doubt that the writer of the psalm is giving us a decisive invitation to approach God for a specific reason. And that reason is to worship him. The biblical concept of worship is one of submission. So the idea, and it's common in the Bible, the idea is about bowing and kneeling, all these postures of submission. So the psalmist wants to say that these are an appropriate position to be in, to be worshipping God. And indeed, if we look at Muslims when they're worshipping, many of them would be on their hands and knees and they would touch their forehead to the floor. It's a demonstration that they are nothing when they compare themselves with God. In many ways, we've narrowed down our understanding of worship. When people stand at the front of a church, say, let's worship God, people stand up and sing. And I think this idea in this psalm about worship is much broader than that. And it says it can encompass many other things. The psalmist wants to go on here to talk about how we should worship God for his greatness because of what he's done. And it talks about him being the great God. He's the God over all gods, that in his hand are the depths of the earth and the tops of the mountains, the seas his. And he says, because God is so great, because he made everything, because he has made us his people, then we should worship him. One of the things that often happens in Psalm 95, though, is people get caught up with the idea in verse 3, let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. So it's been a passage that's been used for volume in worship. That isn't really the point. The idea there about shouting can be used, the same language could be used for sounding an alarm or shouting during battle to warn people about what's going on. So the writer of the psalm saying we shouldn't be timid, we should actually be bold in proclaiming our praise of God. And so it's not about volume that the psalmist wants us to get caught up. I think it's about boldness as we tell others about Jesus. This passage, I think, gives us some interesting thoughts about worship. Have we narrowed down our understanding of worship too much? What does it mean for us to shout aloud to the rock of our salvation today? Is worship just about singing, or is it about how we live our lives? Is it about how we come and how we go as we worship God in everything we do? I hope we're going to have a good discussion about some of those things tonight.